We are officially recording, and we will be beginning in about 15 seconds. Hi everyone, my name is Mary Rubin and I am the Society of Florida Archivists, SFA's past president. Today's webinar, Getting Your Foot in the Stacks, Interviewing in All Kinds of Archives, is brought to you by SFA's Ad Hoc Committee for the COVID-19 Archival Workers Relief Fund, which was established to provide assistance for Florida archival workers experiencing acute, unanticipated hardship due to the crisis. Our presenters today will introduce themselves more thoroughly in a few minutes, but we do have Sarah Coates from the University of Florida, Michael Zaidman from JM Family Enterprises, Whitney Broadaway from the Orange County Regional History Center, and Tyeler McLean from the State Archive of Florida. Tyeler is also SFA's president, so I'm going to turn it over to her for a few words from our president.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you find this presentation helpful if you're applying for new positions or new jobs somewhere. I'm looking at the participant list and it's all folks, a lot of you I recognize and have been in the profession for a while. So thank you for joining us, and maybe we'll give you some helpful pointers as well. I'm really excited to be a part of this presentation, and thank you, Mary, for putting it on, and Sarah and Whitney and Michael for participating as well. I know they all have some really great information to share with you. And before I turn it back to Mary, I just want to invite everyone to check out the website. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Judith Beale Scholarship Fund. We're currently accepting applications for the 2021 scholarship. And since we will not be having another in-person meeting this year, there are two options. So you can use one to attend. Let me pull it up and tell you real information. There are two options for new professionals. One is to register, getting registration fees for the annual meeting for the Society of American Archivists. And then another option is getting funding for an approved professional development opportunity. And both of those are up to $300. So the link is in the chat. We're accepting applications until March 15th. Please share with your colleagues, people on your staff, with friends in the profession, anyone who might be eligible and interested. So again, thank you for joining me and all of us, and I hope you have a good time with us.
Thank you, Tyeler. As a previous recipient of the Judith Beale Scholarship, I'm so happy to hear that the scholarship's enabling students and new professionals options to fund other professional development opportunities during this time. Getting back to the webinar, today we are going to go in a round robin fashion, and our presenters will answer previously requested questions. There will also be time at the end for additional questions. If you have any questions before the end, please put them in the chat. So we are going to start with introductions, as previously mentioned. Sarah Coates, please start us off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Sarah Coates, and I am the Interim University Archivist here at the University of Florida. The University of Florida is a large land-grant institution up here in Gainesville. I won't say too much more about UF as a whole, but I do work for our Special and Area Studies Collections Department within the George A. Smathers Libraries. I have been working in the archives field since July of 2011, so I'm coming up on 10 years. Whoop, whoop. And my previous job experience has been working at the Oklahoma State University Archives at the Edmond Lowe Library in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Thank you, Sarah. And Tyeler, please, introductions.
All right, it's me, Tyeler, again. I am, in addition to the president of the society, also the Archives Collections Management Supervisor at the State Archives of Florida. The State Archives collects, preserves, and makes available the historically significant records of the state. To complement some of those state government records, we also collect private manuscript collections, local government, and we have a large photographic collection. The archives has over 48,000 cubic feet of materials comprising over 3,400 collections and series. If you haven't had a chance to come to the archives, I invite you to journey up to Tallahassee when we're reopened. It's a great place, and we can always do tours for folks when our building is open to the public again. And I've been in the archives profession since 2010. I started at the State Archives, and I've kind of worked my way up there to my current position. And the majority of my experience is in collections management, so more of the behind the scenes work. And that's it for me, Mary.
Thank you, Tyler. And I'm going to turn it over to Whitney.
Hi, my name is Whitney Broadaway. I'm the collections manager at the Orange County Regional History Center in Orlando, Florida. I have been working with museums, exhibits, and archives and collections for about 10 years now. I started where Mary is at the UCF Special Collections University Archives department as the book conservator. That's where I got most of my archival experience now at the Orange County Regional History Center. I oversee our incoming donations. We have a large 3D object collection. We also have a large photograph collection that I manage that's over, it's really skyrocketing. We're at over 20,000 images, probably approaching 30,000 at this point. And we also have a large collection of archives. We collect for about a 7-county region of Central Florida history, as well as a research library and a growing oral history collection.
Thank you, Whitney. And Michael?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Michael Zaidman. I'm the Senior Corporate Archivist for JM Family Enterprises. JM Family is a private company, so I don't share too much externally. But JM Family, we distribute Toyotas, so I always make the offer. But if anybody would like a Toyota in the state of Florida, I can easily give you a nice discount. So just give me an email, a shout out, and I am glad to help you out. No strings attached, but an easy thing that I could do for you. I've been with JM Family 16 years. Prior to my current position, I was with the Jim Moran Foundation. And in 2016, JM Family was about starting to plan for their 50th anniversary. And at that time, they decided they didn't have a corporate archives. So then one was created. And that's where I moved over to this position. Prior to JM Family, I worked as curator at the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse. And then I was also a director at the National Museum of Roller Skating in Lincoln, Nebraska. So that's a shout out to Lincoln. And then I was also the low man on the easel at the Art Institute of Chicago. So I started off as an intern and then worked my way up there and so forth. So I've been around the museum and archive world for quite some time. And the reason why there's an asterisk in the title of this program is because of me, I guess, JM Family. We don't have stacks. So that's why there is an asterisk. We just have a rolling shelf. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you all for the introductions. Now to get more in depth about the application and interview process for your current position and institution. Again, I am turning it over to Sarah.
So for me here at the University of Florida, I had to fill out an application through UF's job website. I got an email setting up a phone interview. I did a phone interview, and then I received an email a couple weeks later inviting me to come out for an in-person interview on campus. So that on-campus interview lasted all day long. It went from 8:30 to 5, and then we went to dinner afterwards. So during that all day long interview, I met with a whole whack of people. I actually found the schedule and was like, oh, wow, I did talk to all these people when I was interviewing for this job. So I met with the search committee. I had to do a presentation to all library staff, which I'll talk more about later in this webinar. I spoke with our HR representative. I spoke with our university archivist and the records manager. I spoke with our department chair of special and area studies collections. I got a tour of the building, and then we went to dinner. There was a lunch in there. But I also spoke with our special and area studies collections department. During all of these particular interview sections, there were a lot of questions asked of me. And I was also given the opportunity to ask questions of other folks, the people who I was talking to. So for both sections of the interview, the phone and the in-person, I was asked about specific projects that I had worked on. I was asked about my experience and thoughts of working with other people, what projects I had managed and how I managed those things, any kind of reference and teaching skills that I had. Basically, it was pulled from the job description. So if it was listed in the job description, it was fair game to be asked about. I was also asked about things that I was interested in with the position. What are some things that I would like to do within the position? And I was also asked, very interestingly, this is the only place where I've been asked this, and I believe it was our department chair who asked me this. I was asked about my perspective on archiving and like the future of archiving, specifically university archives. Our department as a whole in special and area studies has a wide variety of folks and collections. We have rare books, we have manuscripts, we have the Baldwin Library of Historical Children's Literature, we have a popular culture collection, we have an African Studies collection, architecture archives, the Library of Florida History, all kinds of things. And so University Archives is just one part of this larger department. And so I was asked, like I said, I believe by our department chair, about what my perspective was on University Archives, what role do we play within the larger department, the library, and the university as a whole. So that was a really interesting question that I was asked by her. One of the things that I wished I had asked a little bit more about for this particular position, which I had asked in previous interviews at other institutions that I'd interviewed for, but didn't ask here for some reason, was asking a little bit more about department culture. That's always a good thing to ask about. You know, what is your management style? What is the day-to-day life like here? You know, how do people collaborate and work on projects together here, just to kind of give you a sense of that workplace culture. I did ask a lot about future goals for the position, the department, if there were any projects upcoming, just so that I kind of had a sense of what I might be coming into if I accepted the position. One suggestion that I do have is to have a list of questions ready to go. When you're interviewing, don't try to sit there and think of something off the fly. Don't say, I don't have any questions. Chairs and deans, I have spoken to department chairs and deans. Those are good people to ask for like the big library or university-wide big picture type questions. The one thing that surprised me is how tiring it is to be on all day long. You don't get a lot of breaks when you have an all-day interview like this. So it is tiring. So get a good night's rest, eat a good breakfast, etc. But it is really nice to talk to a lot of different people. It's nice to get a lot of different perspectives. It was also nice that everybody asked questions. So it wasn't just people staring at you and you staring back at them. I got lots of questions from every person that I spoke with throughout those interview processes. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to pass it over to Tyler.
All right. Experiences with applying and interviewing for state archives is much different from Sarah's experience with universities. We are not an all-day affair. It's usually, at least up through the position I have, which is kind of like a lower mid-level supervisor. It's just a small hiring committee of could be your peers and also managers above you. It usually lasts about an hour to 2 hours, depending on how much you talk generally. All of our positions are posted on People First, which is a state-run job board. And that's all of our full-time career service positions. And then our part-time, what we call other personnel or OPS, we post those on job boards at FSU, FAMU, TCC, and then the SFA job board. So those are the local community, the colleges in the area. And so let me keep track of where I am. So again, nothing like Sarah's experience. It's very much more low-key, shorter interview and application process. Currently, our hiring is being done over the phone or virtually because of the pandemic, but in the past, most candidates come in the office and meet with the hiring committee. All interviewees are asked the same set of questions, and it usually is about their experience, their education, any training they have in archives, and it usually all relates very heavily to what was listed in the job description. So like Sarah mentioned, it's a really good practice to review the job description and spend some time connecting your past experiences and education with what's listed on the job description that was in the advertisement, just so you're kind of always prepared and have something to say, even if you're not really expecting one of those questions. Let's see. And then what I'm always surprised about is just how nervous you can get in interviews. I've been lucky and I've worked at the state archives for my entire career. So I've always interviewed with the people I've been working with for years past. And no matter how well I know them or how well they know me, I'm just always really nervous. And now being on the other side of hiring and being a hiring manager, I'm still nervous going into interviews, even when I'm not the interviewee. So just as a reminder, take deep breaths, accept the fact that you're going to be nervous, and everything will be fine because you are coming with, once you have the interview, you clearly meet the minimum qualifications and have the education and training needed for the job. So just prepare and sell yourself really well. That's it for me.
Thank you, Tyler. And Michael.
Yeah, okay, so JM Family, obviously it's corporate, so it's very business like, so it's a little bit different than any other process that I went through. I'm just going to talk about when I first got hired in 2005 first, which was more of an application. They didn't really have online practices yet, so it was actually mailed in, and then HR vets, your application. They call you, they call all your references, they do a background check, and what's funny as over the years that I've found out that JM Family years ago in the 80s, they used to do polygraph tests with associates to see if they, did anything, and they would ask all sorts of, probably not appropriate questions, and that was the common joke is, did you pass the poly? So obviously they don't do that anymore, thank God. But I would be so nervous. I mean, like Tyler, I get very nervous on interviews. But in 2005, they did the HR, and I interviewed with them first, and then I had to interview with the direct supervisor, and then there was like 2 other people in that department, so I interviewed with them. I would say the whole process took about 3 hours. I was a wreck. I was just a complete wreck. But I had the qualifications for the job, so that helped the process. That I answered all their questions. Unfortunately, I am not a good interviewer. I get nervous and I forget to ask the questions. Even if I have them written down, I'm too nervous to look down and see what those questions are. And I'm like, I can't do that. I mean, I'm sure it would have been fine. Somehow I managed to get through it because we joked around a lot and we talked about Chicago and things that I know. So I didn't have any small heart attacks during the process. Then in 2016, when I had my current position, what was great is the position itself was in corporate communications. So I was already within the company for 11 years. I knew the hiring manager. We had talked about this position. JM Family was coming upon 50 years and they needed an archivist. They didn't have one. They did hire a consulting firm first, the Winthrop Group, and they did an initial exploration to see if JM Family needed an archivist, and sure enough, they did. And then I interviewed for the position. The position was posted, and it was really, it was my position to lose. I was probably the most qualified candidate. They didn't really look externally for the position. All the positions for JM Family are 7 days internally first. If they fill the position, it never goes externally. So that was very helpful. I did know the hiring manager. I played basketball with him frequently, so I had that rapport with him, which was nice. I was still very nervous, just nervous in general. It did help that my wife is in human resources, so she had a lot of questions. She's like, "What if you ask this way, that way?" And the hiring manager, he didn't really ask me any questions. It was just he knew my work ahead of time. He knew that I was qualified, and that was it. So I don't have a lot to bring to this question, but it's basically you have to show your enthusiasm, which I love archives, and I like promoting archives and talking about different materials within the collection. And I think during that interview process, he saw that. He saw my enthusiasm for archives in general, and that goes a long way. So like everyone else said, practice, practice, practice. Have your elevator speech ready to go at any moment. I think that helps. But overall, I think it was just my position to lose, and I just had to show the excitement of it all. And so then I got the position, and it's just been great ever since. So that's it.
Thank you, Michael. We're also getting some great tips in the chat, so I will cover those at the very end. So we're going to go on to the next question. How has your position changed since you started? And this is back to Sarah.
So when I started at UF in April of 2018, I was hired on as the University Archives Associate, which in practice was essentially assistant university archivist. So my job was to assist the university archivist in her duties. I worked a lot with creating indexes, processing, answering some reference questions, and doing kind of the more data entry kind of level work as part of university archives. Our university archivist retired in late 2019. I believe her last day was sometime in September of 2019. And I then became interim university archivist officially in January, of 2021. But I was basically taking over the role of university archivist since she retired. So I do things like writing policy and writing up documentation. I still do a lot of processing. I answer all of our reference questions now, as opposed to just a handful of them. I keep statistics. I do all kinds of things, basically in addition to the job that I was hired to do. So I'm very busy. I have a lot of meetings. I'm serving on a lot of committees, library-wide right now, as well as my work with SFA. So that's all part of my kind of daily routine. That's really all that's changed for me since I started working here, that I can answer quickly in a nutshell. But yeah, it's essentially a larger responsibility. I'm now in charge of university archives, so I make a lot of decisions and work with a lot of people in our department to help make those decisions.
Thank you. Moving on to Tyler.
All right. So as I've mentioned, I'm at a supervisor level, but I want to kind of address like how positions change in our institution just for the archivist as well. Because if we have openings, that might be where you're starting. With the archivist and collections management, there's only 5 archivists there. 2 of them also work in our capital collateral post-conviction records repository, which contain copies of agency files for defendants on death row. So they're pretty busy kind of supplying those records to attorneys and judges. So we're kind of a small group who has a really big responsibility. So when people start in an archivist position, they usually have like pretty minimum responsibilities. They're learning the ropes, doing basic arrangement description. They might take on an additional project. And then as you gain more experience and you worked a little bit longer, you kind of start accruing responsibilities. So when I was the Archivist 3 in collections management, kind of started out a little bit smaller and then started picking up responsibilities. At one point, I handled our Facebook page and outreach through that. I did a lot. It grows with you. So that's something to be mindful of when you get positions, and it kind of reflects what Sarah was talking about too, with her position. With my current job though, I kind of lucked out. My supervisor position actually started and I managed 15 people in our collections management and our reference services, which is a lot of work, managing all of those areas. And we were able to create another supervisor position who oversees our reference and access services. So those were removed from my section, and I'm able now to focus exclusively on collections management. So I spend a lot of time working on policies and procedures for collections management, overseeing projects like creating finding aids and other subject guides by staff. So I have a lot more, I'm able to be more hands-on with staff and their projects, and also do some projects with collections on my own, where when I started in this position, I don't think I touched an archival record for a full year, because I was so busy doing really administrative stuff on a regular basis. And then I think a big one, and I think a lot of people might experience this, is the job just gets a little bit easier as you go on, because you get more comfortable in the things that were kind of weighing you down in the beginning. So really basic, what I think are basic now, took me way too long when I first started. So that's a big change to experience as well. And that's my answer for that question, Mary.
Thank you, Tyler. And Whitney?
So when I was first hired, when I started, basically the 2 people that hired me, the executive director and the head of the collections department, they both, about the week before I started, they both left the institution. So I came in to a very small department that was missing several positions. We very quickly went down to only 2 people, and our department was built to work on 4. So I feel a lot of the same way as what Tyler was saying. There were so many things. I didn't have really a supervisor to train me on how to do all the things that I was upfront in my interview about. Well, I've not had experience with this, but I have done this. So there was a lot of just like second guessing and stuff like that, and that has definitely gotten a lot better with time. But also our department has changed so drastically. We've gone from 2 people to we now have a department of 10 people. And you would think that would decrease the amount of stuff I have to do, but it has only gotten bigger because now that we are bigger, we are doing more ambitious projects. And I do struggle a lot with like what Tyler was saying. I got into this because I love collections, and sometimes depending on the position that you're in, it's really hard to actually work directly with the collections because you're working so much on managing projects. There's so many times that I wish I could just trade places with my volunteers, and I could just sit down and process a collection, but I have to delegate that to somebody else. So that's definitely something that has changed, and just, you know, we're kind of between all of our other new additions of new positions, you know, responsibilities kind of have morphed around and changed, and just we've all had to get used to kind of changing our puzzle pieces to fit into the group.
Thank you, Whitney. And Michael, I feel like you covered a lot of this, but if you have anything to add, please.
Sure. Yeah, just I'll be brief. So I interviewed with corporate communications, but when I was actually hired, I was in associate engagement, which is another department. So I started with them for 2.5 years, and then that department kind of dissolved, and then I floated back to corporate communications, and that's where I'm at now. Basically, so I've had a couple different supervisors, so that has changed, but overall, my position is a loan arranger position. I had one intern, and then that kind of just dissolved as well. But it's constantly, I have to be proactive completely to find the memos or find the proof of whatever history kind of happens. So, which is great about this position is I could ask anybody for anything to prove that so-and-so department changed or whatever. So I'm always reaching out, being proactive, asking for emails or newsletters, or if I see something posted, I follow up with that person directly. And that goes all the way up to the executives. Everybody is on board with the archives, which is such a great reassurance. I have no budget issues and that sort of thing. So I don't quite have to worry about that, which is, no writing grants, which is another reason why I love corporate archives. It's just a little bit easier for me, but just being in this position, it's so nice to see people appreciating an archive and the history the company has and that sort of thing. So those are my only real changes that have happened with me and the company. But you just always have to be on your toes, and that's keeps me young, I guess. That's it. Thanks.
You had me at no budget issues. All right.
That's a great one.
We're going to go back to Sarah on telling us about the application and interview process for other institutions.
So I will say that at an academic institution, they all tend to run the same way as I had experienced here at UF. You apply through the university's job site, and then you get a phone interview, and then you generally, again, this was all, pre-pandemic, you would fly out, in person. They would usually be all day long. There were a couple of them that I went to that were like a half day. But that was very rare. They were usually the all day long slogs. You talk to relatively the same groups of people that I did here, the search committee, having a presentation to do, speaking with the HR rep, talking to the department chair or to your direct supervisor or both, getting a tour of the building, talking to the entire department, etc. Some of the differences, sometimes if it was a half day, I did not get lunch. So I was on my own for lunch. Sometimes, even if it was an all day thing, there was no dinner. So I was on my own for dinner. For some places, your hotel is not super close to the university. And so I would have to get picked up by someone, usually on the search committee, and they drive me to campus. Other places I had to Uber. Same thing from getting back and forth to the airport. Sometimes I spoke with the associate deans or the dean of the library. Sometimes I don't. It just depended on the institution. Something else that I wish I had known about is some places would go ahead and pay for my hotel and my plane ticket up front, so there was no cost to me, which was excellent. Other places, you had to pay for your own flights and your own hotel room usually working with like the administrative assistant for the department or for the library. They'd help you, but they basically say, hang on to all your receipts and give them to us when you get here, and we'll reimburse you later. And so there can be, especially if you're interviewing out of state, there can be a pretty large out-of-pocket expense that you should be prepared for. All of the questions are relatively the same. You know, you get asked about experience working with people and projects and things like that. That's really the only differences. Like I said, they tend to all be kind of the same. It's still tiring, but it's still exciting to get to meet and talk to a lot of people. In some of the places that I've been, I didn't necessarily talk to a lot of the archivists. I talked to a lot of folks who were librarians, and a lot of them, no offense to librarians, don't necessarily know what an archivist does. So it was exciting, as others have pointed out, to like get to talk to them about what an archive is and why it's exciting to work in one and why you want to, you know, promote your collections and things like that. So those are really the major differences in academic institutions.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to pose this question to Whitney as well.
So at our institution, it's very different than what I was used to. All the basically the process that Sarah just described. It's much more like applying for just a job. I had basically a phone interview that lasted about 30 minutes, and then an in-person interview that lasted about an hour, maybe a little bit more. And that's pretty much how our hiring process has gone on for all of our other positions that I've been a part of on the hiring side. One added thing with us is because we do have funding from the Orange County government. Many of our positions are funded by the Orange County government. I'm an Orange County employee. So there's a lot of added hoops to jump through with working with Orange County HR. And Mary, I know you said you were going to ask this at the end, but can I jump on Carol's question? Because I feel like this fits. We have had Carol in the chat asked about, you know, if you receive like an automatic, like, we've received your application, please don't contact us, reply after, you know, submitting an online application, is it okay to follow up? And I feel like that's going to be so different everywhere. I know for us, if we're hiring an Orange County position and it's not funded through the society, the museum side, we are hiring through Orange County HR, which is a completely separate department from us. You know, we have to use them. All the applications go to HR. They don't come to us. They go to HR. HR filters out what HR believes fits what we have listed as our minimum qualifications. And there have been several times when we've posted a position, we know of someone like a current intern or something, or someone in the community that has applied for that position. We then receive those applications you know, from HR, and their application is not a part of it. But because we knew, we go back to HR and we're like, well, what about so-and-so's application? And HR is like, well, you asked for 1 year of experience, and they had 5 years of experience, but HR didn't think it was relative. And we're like, they worked at a museum for 5 years. That is relative, because HR doesn't understand what we're looking for. So at least in there have been plenty of times that we've been able to like pull out someone's application from the theoretical trash, because someone did follow up with an email like, hey, just wanted to let you know, I, you know, applied for that job. And we're like, okay, great. Like I've seen them around. I know that person. And then we got the applications and their name wasn't there. And we went and followed up with HR. I'm sure times when I definitely agree with Dean, don't call, please don't call. But I'm sure there's sometimes when someone might find you to be annoying and too persistent. You know, you want to be careful and just be like, hi, just letting you know, very excited. I sent my application. Please let me know if you have any more questions, blah, blah. But you know, sometimes it is nice to just let a real person know that's in the department that your application got thrown in, so that someone knows to look out for you.
On that same question, does Michael, Sarah, or Tyler want to weigh in on how their institution would handle receiving a follow-up email from the auto-generated emails about applying?
I mean, for me, I just have the experience with my intern. HR. So, I mean, we get thousands of applications for all the other positions. And obviously they don't really know much about archives. So if I got a follow-up email or, even a phone call, which I know nobody else here likes, but if I got one, I would happily accept it because, I mean, I probably only have like, I think for that internship, I only had like maybe 3 applicants. And I was paying $15 an hour. I was, and 30 hours a week. And I still, was grasping to try and find anybody. And so I, like through HR, I knew they kicked out like 6 or 7 people just because they didn't think they had the experience. So if any of those 6 or 7 people actually followed up with me as the hiring manager, I would have gladly accepted it and been excited to hear from somebody that's saying, I got this automated response, but nobody, whatever. So, I mean, for me personally, that would be fine. Thanks.
Yeah, I am on a search committee that's been suspended because we're not currently hiring right now for staff positions during the pandemic and budget issues and things like that. But as Dean pointed out in the chat, they HR basically just gathers up all the applications and puts them into an online portal and then sends the link to the search committee and they say, here you go. When I hire students, it's a similar thing where they, get all put into a portal. I get sent the link. I did have a few students email me and say, oh, I applied for the position and I'm really interested. Please let me know. To me, that was fine. I never got phone calls. I don't mind getting an email like that. I appreciated when people do email me that they say, like in their subject line, oh, application for blah, blah, blah position, and then say what position it was they applied for and their name, because then I can know what it is they're emailing me about. I get a lot of email, and having those clear subject lines and clear short message is really helpful. I know some of my fellow UF folks are in this webinar and they may have some more insight because they've been on bigger search committees than I'm on. And they might have their own opinions, so they might put in the chat to follow up with.
I also think following up is a good idea. And this is from a personal experience this past year. The state archives is within the same department as elections, so we have very high IT security, and we don't always get, so like I said, some of our positions are posted on job boards and we have people submit them directly to the hiring manager and they don't go through HR. We had people's emails not come through because of this, like whatever email provider they were using was flagged by our system. So I think it's always good to follow up in some way. And if you're following up by email, don't include attachments because that could get your email lost as well. And for the ones that go to like our human resources, I think it's nice to follow up with the hiring manager just so they see your name and know this person is interested. And it shows that you're a little bit more interested in the position maybe than someone who just saw a job opening and applied for one.
Oh, I feel like I just want to clarify real quick that I wasn't talking about replying to the automated generated email, making sure that especially if you're just applying to something that's big form, like you feel like this is being sent to a big HR department, maybe finding out who would actually be the supervisor for that position, contacting them directly to just say, hey, very excited, I just applied for this job, seemed a little, you just flub a little bit, seemed a little wonky, just want to, touch base with you, make sure my application actually went in, and just leave it at that. Let me know if you have any questions, kind of thing.
Thank you, everyone. Whitney, did you have anything else to add about the application and interview process for other institutions?
No, I think I've covered that.
Okay.
Okay, we can move on.
We will come back to Michael on that question. So we are going to move on to the next one. How did you handle curveballs that happened during your interview? And I'm going to pass this over to Sarah.
Yeah, this question came from me because I've had several. Thankfully, none of them happened during my interview for my job here at UF, but they have happened at other institutions that I shall not name. But if you're really curious, you can ask me, in chat, and I'll send you a DM. I have been called by someone else's name by the search committee chair. I have had rather pushy and or rude questions asked during lunches. I've had experiences where someone has asked me a curveball question and my brain just went whoosh, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to answer this. I'm going to talk a little bit more about tech mishaps later when I talk about presentations, but yeah, all of these things have happened to me. So the biggest thing is to remember that you are interviewing for a position, but you are also interviewing the people that you might be working with and for. So remember that you're still on, you're on camera, your reactions are going to be how they judge you and perceive you. So be gracious, be polite, be firm if you need to. Don't be rude, watch your tone, watch your body language. I kind of laughed off the name thing when I was called by the wrong name, and I said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, did I forget to, introduce myself? I'm really sorry, I'm Sarah, blah, blah, blah. This happened like towards the end of the dinner, so she obviously knew my name or should have, but yeah, don't point that out. If you need time to think of an answer to a curveball question that someone's thrown you, something that's nice to do is to say, oh gosh, that's a really interesting question. And then, come up with something. It buys you a couple of extra seconds to get over the brain panic of, oh gosh. You can also rephrase the question before you answer it, like repeat portions of it. Don't do this every single time because it makes you sound like a robot. But if you do get that, it's a good tip to kind of let yourself breathe for a second before you answer. Saying things like, and I think Whitney was the one who said this, I don't have experience with that particular problem, situation, project, whatever, but here's how I would handle it, is also a very valid response. The biggest thing is don't lie or don't embellish your answers. You will get caught out. Just don't do it. It's not happened to me, but I have been in interviews where people have done it and it's not pretty when it happens. So just be honest, be polite, be firm, and remember that you're on camera. So you gotta watch what you say.
Thank you, Sarah. And back to Tyler.
I'll talk about this from the side of kind of the interviewer. I think if you're interviewing for a position, how you handle the curveball matters more than anything else. So if you don't have an answer to a question, how you handle not having an answer matters more than not having an answer. So for an entry-level position, we have interview questions that we don't really expect people to have a good answer for necessarily. We're just trying to gauge what they know and what we might need to train them on when they hire. So not always having an answer isn't a big deal, but how you handle not having an answer matters. Not being like, oh, I don't know, or I can't do this, doesn't really bode well with whoever is hiring you or looking to hire you. I will say, if you're called the wrong name, I have a tendency to mispronounce people's names all the time. Correct them during the interview. So if you are hired, they're not thrown off on your first day when you're like, that's not my name. So like Sarah mentioned, just being courteous, being firm, clarifying things, like if you're called the wrong name. And I want to highlight what Sarah said too, never embellish or lie with an answer. I think it's way better to say, I don't have experience with this, but I'm willing to learn. Or like she said, I don't have experience with that, but here's how I would do it, is far better than embellishing something. The hiring people have seen your resume, they know the experience you have there, and they're going to contact your references. And if you are hired and you embellish something, they'll find out really quickly. But again, like I use interviews and kind of non-answers as a way to gauge what we need to do. So don't always get thrown off by that either. That's it.
Thank you so much. And Whitney?
So I like to think of myself as a very confident and outgoing person when I need to be, but I still, like in interviews, especially, of course, the first question is always going to be like, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I just, have that moment where I'm like, who am I? I don't know who I am. Like, I totally have those blank moments. And one that really sidelined one of my interviews once was, I was asked about, it was like, oh, have you ever had experience where, you were having, you had to settle an inter-employee issue, and how did you handle that, and blah, blah, blah. And I, tried to do my normal, like, oh, let me think about it. Cause like Sarah said, give yourself some time after each question. Don't try to come up, like, you can take a pause, you can think. But I was blinking, and I got so in my head, because I was like, surely I should have a really good example for this. Like, I've had so many experiences. It was like a Rolodex. Surely this has happened to me before. And it was only after the interview that I was like, oh, I thought of the perfect answer, which is basically like, I don't need to find an exact instance of that. But, I thought of like, oh, you know what? There was this one time where, there was something happening between two employees, and basically I witnessed what my supervisor at the time, how she handled it. And, don't be afraid to use someone else, not as saying that you did it, but especially when they talk about like, oh, how would you handle, or how have you handled in the past, to say, you know what, I have never been a supervisor in that position before, but there was this one time when, this and this happened, and my supervisor at the time came in and talked to the two parties and did this, and talk about how, I really respected how well she handled that when that was happening. It really stuck with me, because I was like, this is how I would want to handle that should that ever happen to me. And that just, tells, even though it wasn't you, it tells the interviewer that you have a plan, and you are familiar with what to do if trouble arises in your job. So what I've started doing is just kind of thinking over my past history of things I've done, things in the workplace where I'm like, wow, this is kind of a thing that came up, but then someone handled it really well, and kind of writing those down to have almost like a set stories where if someone asks me, have you ever been in this situation? I can, instead of trying to find on the moment the perfect situation, I can think of, well, not that exactly, but there was this one time where this, and you tell a story that either exemplifies, how you handled things nicely, or how you have learned to handle things nicely. And so you're not just stuck deer in the headlights like I'm so often done.
Thank you, Whitney. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Great advice. I mean, wow. I wish I had this webinar when I was getting any other job. My biggest curveballs, I think, whenever I even with this webinar, I'm nervous and I forgot things from previous questions, but when I interview, I always forget their names that I'm interviewing with. Like and sometimes, like, especially at JM, I had interviewed with like 3 different supervisors in different departments. I'm like, who was that and why? And I want to follow up with them and write them a thank you note. I mean, 2005, email wasn't email today. So I actually wrote physical thank you notes and sent them out. And then with the secretaries, I would follow up with them, like, who did I interview with again? Can I get their names, their position titles? I mean, I was a wreck. I'm still a wreck. I'm sweating right now. But so that would probably be my biggest curveballs, is just I get so nervous and I forget things. And even with the questions, there is nothing wrong with, stopping, taking a breath, drinking the water, looking at the piece of paper and saying, what about these questions here, and following up. As a person that gets nervous a lot, I would have no issue with that if someone did that. I don't think anybody else would, especially when you're early on in your career. There's just nothing wrong with that. I think that's fine. My biggest curveball, which we'll kind of talk about it in another question, but I just want to bring it up, was when I did interview, I interviewed at a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., and then we went to lunch afterwards. And my strikeout was I didn't order kosher food like she did. And I should have just done that and been done with that. But just by doing something as silly as that, I don't think I got the job because of that. I thought the interview went well because of my mistakes after that. I think that was one of the reasons why. So I think we have another question about, restaurants and stuff like that. And so don't drink too much, which is always a good one too. But that's it. Thank you.
And I can reiterate what Michael said about, I wish I had this webinar years ago. I've definitely been called the wrong name at an interview before. I do want to also say, if you have any questions, please ask in the chat. This webinar is definitely going to run over the hour mark, so if you have to leave, no worries. It is being recorded and will be uploaded to the SFA YouTube within 24 hours. So again, if you have any questions, please ask in the chat. And we're going to go on to the next one. How do you handle phone versus in-person or Skype/Zoom interviews? So this is going back to Sarah.
I'm going to combine the phone, Skype, Zoom interviews portion all together here. Just like Michael said, always have a notepad and a pencil, pen, several of them in case your pencil lead breaks or your pen suddenly runs out of ink or doesn't work. Jot down the names. Like every phone interview that I've been in, everybody goes around like we did at the beginning of this and introduces themselves. Even if you don't get their name spelled right, just write down their names. Because again, to me, it's good practice to send a thank you email, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I also would jot down bits of their questions that they were asking me. Sometimes when you're in a phone interview or a Skype or Zoom interview, they ask you like a multi-part question, and my brain like here's the first part of the question and then like shuts off for the second and third parts, and then I answer the first part and then there's like this expectant silence, and I'm like, oh, was there something else? And I'm like, oh shoot, so I learned, just you don't have to write it verbatim, but just get down a couple of keywords. That's really helpful. Find somewhere quiet, make sure there's no distractions. Be aware of your background, especially on a phone call. Is there a lot of noise around you? If you're on Skype or Zoom, background noise, but also what's visible behind you on your screen. I'm at home, so I'm not floating above our grand reading room right now. I'm using a virtual background. Use those if you need to. Find a flattering angle. Make sure you have good lighting. Make sure your internet works. Right before this webinar, my internet like cut out, and I was like, oh gosh, I may have to turn my internet off, or turn my video off. When you're in person, try not to fidget. It's fine to be nervous, but like don't have your hands like up on the table, like obviously fidgeting with things. If you're gonna fidget with your feet where they can't see you. I've done that before. I'm a nervous fidgeter. Don't swivel in your chair. Don't sit there and do this, because that's really distracting to people who are trying to talk to you. Bring your own water bottle. You may or may not be offered a water bottle, but bring your own, obviously with a lid that seals. Some kind of a professional looking bag or purse, and a nice folio or notepad holder that will fit inside that bag so you can have your hands free. And a pencil or a pen. And I would do the same thing in an in-person interview. As they were asking questions, I would like jot down keywords from their questions just so I made sure I answered everything. And like Michael said, to me, it's really nice to send a thank you for the interview email. to like the department chair, the search committee. You don't have to send it to every member of the department that you talk to, but the major folks, it's a really nice gesture to send that within like 24 hours after your interview, just to say thank you, just to say, you know, I'm still interested, you know, or here's something else, etc. Also be sure if you had a lot of assistance from like an administrative assistant who helped you book your flights or got you hotels or, you know, helped you in any way, email that person too. It makes a good impression.
Thank you. We're going to put this over to Tyler. I'm sorry, Whitney. I apologize, Whitney.
So I don't have a whole lot to add, but yeah, I would just basically reiterate everything Sarah said.
Michael, anything to add?
I think Sarah nailed it. We gotta waste any more time. Sarah, I agree.
Y'all are making me blush.
Then it's back to you, Sarah. What tips do you have for lunch, dinner portions of interviews?
So these can be tricky, and Michael has excellent advice that, to be honest, I had never thought of, which is, you know, if you notice everyone's ordering kosher, you should probably also order kosher. If you're noticing that everyone's ordering vegetarian or vegan options, you might also want to do that too. For me, I've always tried to order last if possible, just so that I kind of have an idea of what everyone else is getting. Or, you know, casually bring up, you know, oh gosh, you know, what's good here? So that gives you an idea of what people will order so that you're not ordering the most expensive or the biggest thing on the menu, and don't do that. Oftentimes the library or place that you're interviewing at will pick up the tab for lunch and dinner. They don't always, and it's not very cool to like order like filet mignon when everybody else is ordering like a hamburger. So just be aware of things like that. Somebody else said don't drink alcohol unless it's offered, and even then just have one glass. I do not drink when I normally anyway, so I always decline. You know, I'm like, oh, thank you so much, you know, but I'm fine, you know, I'll just stick with water or Coke or whatever. Think about what you get. Don't order something that's going to make your breath smell terrible. You know, things that are messy, you might want to think against, because you don't want to walk around with a huge stain on your clothes. Use your manners. You know, we've all been taught to say please and thank you, and don't talk with your mouth full, you know, things like that. These do tend to be more informal. It's a good time to ask questions about the area, about the library or the university, things to do in the area, you know, getting to know you kinds of things. But again, you're still interviewing. So, you know, again, watch what you say, watch what you ask. The people who go to lunch and dinner with you are generally asked by the search committee, at least in my experience, hey, how was Sarah when you guys were at lunch? You know, what did you guys talk about? How was she? You know, that kind of a thing. Be polite to everyone, be polite to the wait staff, be polite. This is just general good rule of thumb. Anyway, be a good human, you know, be nice to everybody that you talk to, no matter what stage of the interview process you're in. And make sure that you say thank you to your hosts for lunch and dinner. You never know if they're having to pay out of their own pocket and then are getting reimbursed. So it's just polite to say thank you. But do be prepared to pay your own way. I've not been asked to do this, but it could happen. Just be prepared to pay yourself as opposed to being paid for.
It probably looks good to just offer.
I've done that too.
Then have them tell you, no, we got it.
Yeah, I usually ask them like, oh, you know, let me in the, they're like, oh, no. A lot of times they'll just flat out say, oh, the library's paying for this, so don't worry about it, which is nice. So if you're on a search committee and you know that your library is paying for it, say that, you know, at lunch, like at the beginning, so that your poor, you know, interviewee's not sitting there sweating.
Michael, would you like to add anything to this?
Sure. I mean, everything Sarah said, obviously, again, it's spot on. As far as like drinking, I mean, lunches, most people won't be drinking. I just have a point to make now with whenever I go out to eat or work, I usually wait if I'm with my supervisor or boss, whatever. I'll wait until they order a drink, and if they do, and then they encourage it, then I'll do it. But I'll try not to drink. Otherwise, it's just, I don't know, it's just going to be dangerous. So just, common thoughts, and be a nice human and thank everybody, especially when they pick up the tab of that. The lunch is, just order whatever they're ordering. Just make it simple. If they're getting a salad, you get a salad. Don't, this way you don't even have to think about it. And then if you don't like it, then so be it. But it'll just go a long way if you just make it a smooth transition and continue to ask questions, or try to. I'm probably not a good example, but if you are good at it and you could remember questions in a more casual environment, what do you like to do? Do you like sports? What do you do in the area? What are things to do on the weekends? Find out what their hobbies are aside from work. And who that person really is. Do they like poetry? Do they like movies or whatever? This way they get to see a different side of you. And I remember one time I was interviewing, and we were just chit-chatting, and the one guy said, oh, I'm trying to get a squash appointment. I'm like, oh, I play squash. And he was like, you play squash? I mean, it blew him away that I knew what squash was, and then I actually play it. Nailed the job. The interview part was terrible, but just because of this casual lunch, we both play squash. He's like, oh, I have a squash partner. Boom, you're hired. I mean, it was that easy. It was just like a simple thing. So just, do's and don'ts, but thank you.
And some of these reiterate some of the comments that have been made in the chat, one of which said that we interviewed a librarian candidate and everything was fine until the committee took her out for an evening dinner. She treated the waitstaff rudely and shabbily, and that sunk the interview. I tell my students, know that you're always on camera during your interview, formal and informal. And then a second comment, don't drink too much at dinner.
Mary, can I jump in about that real quick before I forget?
Mhm.
This isn't specifically about like lunch and dinner, but between that chat comment and Michael and Sarah, it made me think of, what, treat everyone like you would treat the executive director. There have been some times where I've seen candidates come in and they treat like me or even my boss as if there's a very obvious overtone of, oh, hello, lower staff. And it's just very off-putting, as if, first of all, they've assumed the hierarchy of the staff, and they're incorrect, especially when it comes to my boss, but also the fact that you would treat someone in a different hierarchy role different than anybody else. It's very off-putting.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Whitney, and Michael too. So our next question are, what are some tips about starting in the field? And this actually goes along well with a question in the chat. Any thoughts on how librarians can get archival experience if they're already out of grad school and internships are no longer an option? Volunteering, ? But that's hard to do when you're working full time.
Yeah, it is difficult. And I always tell people, having a library job is a great foothold because at least you have experience in an adjacent field. Trying to get volunteering opportunities, especially right now, is difficult because a lot of places are closed due to the pandemic. But volunteering is also useful, and it can get you some useful contacts, and show people, hey, I'm interested, I do a good job. But I always say, just apply. The worst that can happen is someone tells you no. Obviously, if you're just starting out as an archivist, you don't want to try to be applying for the head of a university archives position, because you're probably not going to get that. But for an entry-level position, I had no experience at all in an archive when I started in the archives field. I was halfway through library school. I'd been applying for library jobs, hadn't gotten any, and just interviewed, on a whim and said, okay, well, I'll do, and I got the job. And I basically had to hit the ground running because my boss had a double pulmonary embolism like a month after I started and then was gone for 3 months. So I had to teach myself a lot of things. So that's one of my tips, is be a sponge. Read everything you can. The Archives Fundamentals series that's produced through SAA, the Society of American Archivists, is an excellent series to give you a good theoretical grounding in the archives field. Join listservs, join professional organizations. You can join SAA for very little. You can join a couple of the listservs for free. SFA is an excellent resource for you as well. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Everybody understands you're new. They want to help you. Archivists are generally a very nice bunch of folks. We don't bite, we'll help you out. Something that I did when I started was read what I have. So I sat down and I read, this sounds horrible, but I read every single finding aid for every single collection that I had. When I started here at UF, I did the same thing. I just spent hours just reading through the findings. Did I memorize them? No, but I wanted to know what I had. I just went and opened drawers and looked through what photographs do I have, reading through the manuals that your department has put out. So our processing manual, reading through any documentation or policies that your department has. Just get yourself familiar with that. If you're trying to start out in the field, a lot of places will put things like this online, and you can find them. And if you have questions, you can always ask us, and we're happy to, help point you in those directions. But yeah, the biggest thing is just be a sponge and don't be afraid to ask questions. That's my advice.
Thank you. Tyler?
Sarah did a great job covering it. I would also say yes to whatever you can. Take on responsibilities that you can do and learn from. Be open to guidance and suggestions from your peers or your supervisors. And for the volunteering, I know a lot of places are offering virtual volunteering. So our Florida Memory Project has an online volunteering. So there are, I think with the pandemic, more opportunities for that. So volunteer as much as you can to get into the field, but also know your value and ask for the salary you deserve. I think that's a big one. We tell people to volunteer and intern and stuff, but know your value and that you're bringing knowledge and skills to the table. And don't forget that when you're starting out in the field too.
Thank you. Whitney?
Yeah, so it's rough out there right now. And it is, my go-to answer for this is, volunteering and internships, but we struggle with this in museums too, that it is so unfair. Those are usually, volunteers aren't paid, and internships are often unpaid. And so it really starts to weed out, who can even get that pre-job experience, because who can afford to go do some things outside of an actual work time like that. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of ways to get added experience before your entry-level job. While actually still getting paid. And unfortunately, most people are looking for that because the market is flooded. When we were hiring for our archivists, one of the things that I would be looking at is that those kinds of things on a resume to show that, which is unfortunate, because really a person coming out of their MLIS and applying directly for our archives position, they should be perfectly qualified to have that position. But we have so many of those candidates that it ends up that the candidates that stand out are the candidates that, even if they are also still right out of, they also have list these as SFA webinars on your resume, that you've attended webinars, that you've, done some added things, that you volunteer on the weekends, usually not on the weekends because the archives are closed. But and then Dean's in here. Dean, get out of the chat. Dean's in here stealing all my good advice that I was going to say. That, you know, if you do have, say, a part-time or full-time job in a library, but it's not in the archives where you want to be, ask if you can incorporate like an hour in the archive. Like, can I go train with the archive for like an hour of my week and learn how to, you know, get hands-on learning on how to process a collection and things like that? Because, you know, we would have many applicants that they've gone through their MLIS, they currently work in circulation at a library, and they want to come do archives. But what we weren't seeing was like practical experience in archives. They work in a library, but they don't seem to, you know, based on reading their resume, they don't seem to have an interaction with the archives. But on the other hand, we had other applicants who were very similar, but in their library description, they talk about how, oh, I also helped the archives process this collection. And a lot of it is just being able to see a candidate who's like, they have something more than just classroom experience. They know what it's like to work in an archive, and, you know, that could be volunteering or things like that. And I will also, if you're not on the SFA listserv, please send me an email, because I will be shooting out. We have developed a paid internship that we are pushing out, and we have another one possibly in the works that I'll put out on the SFA listserv. So if you're not on it, first of all, why? Get on it. If you're not going to do that for some reason, email me and I'll send those to you too.
Thank you, Whitney. And to Michael.
Yeah, these are great tips. One thing that has not been mentioned for starting in the field is get a mentor. SAA has a free mentor program. They'll match you up with somebody, and usually that mentor is great. You could bounce questions off them and do all sorts of things. The SAA Business Archives also has a mentorship program, so you can get a business archivist mentor as well. The Business Archives is great about helping new people in the field, which is just a great community. I can't push them enough. But one of the other things that and it's unfortunate it's virtual right now, but SFA is the best organization out there, hands down. Everybody in SFA is so helpful. If you get to go to an actual meeting in person, everybody is super friendly. They want you to succeed. There's not a bad person in SFA. Well, maybe one, but that's it. Everybody else is super nice. It just can't be a better group. The Judith Beale Scholarship Program is there to help you. I love how they changed it up this year, where they're giving you membership or to attend the meeting. I mean, it's just phenomenal. SFA is the best. And I've made my best friends, some of my best friends from SFA, who I still go back to from time to time and ask them questions. There's no hesitation. They'll answer my questions. But for starting in the field, one other suggestion I have, volunteer. You know, everyone says volunteer. Go to your local historical society. They need help. Your mom and pop, really small place, you could just say, I want to, volunteer for an hour over my lunch break, and I'm going to help you sort through your vertical files. They're going to love you, and you'll start building up that experience level. Of course, it's free. They don't have any money, but you'll put that on your resume, and you've been working at, mom and pop, the Deerfield Beach Historical Society for a year. And then, you know what? They're going to hire you part-time, then full-time, and then you're going to be the executive director. So just think about all that. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, can I jump in? Because Michael made me think of so many things I forgot to say. First of all, yes, don't forget about museums. If you have your MLIS and you're looking for an archives job and you're thinking libraries, museums have archives. And just like Michael said, they need help. And it is so easy to help them. And seriously, if you want to switch over to museums, probably mom and pop historical society, you could probably become executive director in about 5 years. And also, besides volunteering, like Michael said, being a part of SFA, just being a part of the community so that people know your name. When you're looking at 20 applications and really everyone has enough qualifications to do this entry-level archives job, but one of those people, you're like, you know what, they come to SFA meetings. I know them. I've had a real life conversation with them, and I know they're a real person that has living, breathing thoughts, and I know I get along with them. You're already, heads above the rest of the competition.
My last thing I'll jump into is, get in LinkedIn, put up a profile, like and connect with everybody on this panel. That you're just never going to know where a connection lies, and be open to any field. Museums, historical societies, art museums have archivists. They're out there. You just have to be willing to go beyond your boundaries.
And to add to that, if you are open to volunteering, there are local centers, there are churches, I've seen archivists at orchestra, musical organizations as well, that kind of thing. And then just for the sake of this recording, this is a SFA Society of Florida Archivists sponsored webinar. But besides that, there was another question in the chat. What do you all think of certified archivist exam, and how much does it help with job prospects? And I believe Sarah mentioned that she could answer some of this. I'm not sure about the rest of you, so I'll let Sarah start.
Sorry, my cat just made an appearance. So I am a certified archivist. I passed the exam in 2017. I will say I think it helped me get my job here at UF. I can't say for sure. I have been interviewing for positions really since I graduated from library school in 2012. And I would get through to like an in-person interview on a campus, and then I wouldn't get the position, in part because I didn't have enough experience. I think one of the things that helps is experience. Once I hit the like 5 and 6 year mark in archives, that started getting me with more job opportunities and opportunities to interview for positions. But taking the CA exam, I think, does help. It really depends on where you are in the country. I think it's valued more down here in the Southeast than it is in other portions of the country. There's a lot of thoughts about the certified archivists and if it's really worth it. To me, it's worth a shot. It's not very expensive to take the exam. It's something that you would need to study for. I think if you're just coming out of library school, it might give you a slight advantage over some people. But again, right now the field is just so flooded. Experience is really what's going to help you.
Any additions from Whitney, Tyler, or Michael? And I see.
I value practical experience over the CA certification when looking for candidates, especially if you already have your MLIS. I have lots of feelings about the CA because it's supposed to stand in place of a master's degree, saying that, you know what, I do know how to do archives. I'm certified to be able to do archives. I haven't done the other library, the whole shebang, but archives is my thing. But now it's become to be expected that you have both. So it's never going to hurt you to get it if you have the time and the money. But if you have to choose between volunteering and getting hands-on experience versus getting your CA, I would go for volunteering.
Thank you. All right, moving on. What are the best quality skills of an effective archivist? Back to Sarah.
I'll just read off my little list here that I have. Curiosity. If you do not have an open mind and you don't want to learn new things, this is not the position or job for you. So be curious, be flexible, have a willingness to learn new skills and learn new information. I learn something new every day at my job. Being detail oriented is really helpful, as well as being organized and liking organizing things. Being fine with repetitive work and data entry. I think Whitney said there are days where I wish I could just sit down and like work with you don't always get to work with the cool stuff. A lot of your day is spent answering questions, doing administrative duties, committee work. But there is a lot of repetitiveness in data entry, especially in entry-level positions, where you do get to work more with the cool stuff. So being fine with that is also useful. Being a good public speaker, having those good, what they call soft skills. So being a good people person, being able to interact with people, even if you're an introvert like me, you know, being able to be extroverted at your job is really helpful. Having good research skills, knowing where and when and how to look for things. Teaching and presentation experience is always a good thing. I was an adjunct professor before I became an archivist, so I have teaching experience. I do teach classes. They're usually one-off instructional sessions, but having that ability to public speak and know how to convey information is really essential. And also being tech savvy and being comfortable with technology. I'm not saying you have to be like some master coder who can, you know, code in C++ and all the other computer programming languages, but having, you know, some knowledge of XML, HTML, archival standards, knowing how to use Excel, being comfortable with learning new technologies is also really important.
Thank you. Tyler?
I think just to reiterate what Sarah said, because she covered all the things on my list, is just the willingness to constantly be learning new practices, skills, and knowledge. The field is not stagnant, and remaining stagnant in what you do and know does not make you an effective archivist. It's important to always be growing as a professional archivist. So take advantage of any opportunities that come your way, whether it's free webinars or training or anything like that. And then always just being flexible. The days never go the way you want them to go, and there's always something new coming up. So I think being flexible is a really good quality of an effective archivist.
Anything to add, Whitney?
The only thing I can think of to add is learning about your collection that you're working in. You know, a lot of times we have to remind patrons that the archivist's job is not to know everything, but to assist and facilitate you finding the things in the archives. But you know what? The more you know about the archive, the easier that always is. And of course, there's always those hidden things that you would never think of to bring up to a researcher, and they would never find on their own, except for like 5 years ago, there was another researcher that stumbled across it, and now you know about it.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, basically what everybody else said. I would say being a detective, you know, like that is very helpful. You're going through layers, trying to find the answers. The more you know about your collection, the better off. The quicker turnaround for a research request, when you have you have to know by 12 o'clock the answer, it'll help. Being organized is very helpful. Being clean with your desk, just having everything appear very organized helps. I'm a very messy person, but my front line that people see if they came into the office is pretty clean. But behind the doors, it's a mess. But they don't need to see that. But showing your enthusiasm really helps. And the last thing I think is really effective is time management. Making sure you're giving yourself enough time to do any task is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And you're not allowed into my office. I'm stealing that from someone else's comment that was sent to me.
Yeah, I meant that for the group. You're not allowed in my office. I be very embarrassed.
Same here. I'm just sitting here going, I need to clean my desk off.
So we do have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nobody else is allowed in my office right now, so it's fine.
We do have 3 more questions on our roster, but if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat so that way we can answer them directly. I do realize this has gone way over time, but I do think that we are getting some great answers and I do want to finish. So going on, what do you wish you had known about the type of archivist that you are, University Corporate Government, for example, before you went down that path? And what is a typical day like? Sarah?
I think when people hear university archives, a lot of people automatically assume, oh, that sounds really boring. You're just dealing with like the administrative records of your university. How exciting can that be? The answer is it's a lot more fun than you think it is, because I don't just have the more dry administrative records. I have stuff from faculty, I have stuff from students, we have memorabilia, photographs. There's lots of questions that get asked about things that happen in university history, that we're able to answer because we have all of these things. Something that I wish I had known before I really delved into the world of university archivists was just how much privacy and confidentiality issues will come up, especially when you're dealing with student records or letters written to university presidents. Florida has a very open records law, and so we have to be very careful to protect people's privacy. We have an ethical obligation to do so per the SAA Code of Conduct. So that's something that I knew about, but I didn't realize just how much that would impact a lot of the decisions that we make every day, when we're answering reference questions, as it does. I really wish there was a typical day, but I kind of like that there isn't a typical day. On any given day, I could be doing data entry. I could be answering reference questions. I could be going downstairs and pulling out boxes from the stacks to look through things to try to help a patron find an answer. I could be in meetings working with fellow librarians on committees. I can be processing. I can be writing policies. I could be teaching a class. I could be working in a webinar. I could be, there's no typical day, which I like. I like the variety. Sure, there are weeks where you kind of do a similar thing over and over again, but it generally varies day to day, week to week, which is nice, because it keeps the work from feeling mundane. You're always doing something important and new.
Pass this over to Tyler.
All right, so I work in government archives, and I think the biggest thing I wish I knew is that sometimes you're more of a government employee than you are an archivist. So you're beholden a little bit more to the bureaucratic side of things than you are to the archives. There's a positive to that. You get really good at the elevator speech for your archives, because you're working a lot with people who aren't archivists, who have no experience in archives, and a lot of people who call you librarians. So that's a positive way to look at that challenge. And like Sarah said, there is really no typical day. But I think that's also what I really like about archives. I usually have a long list of things that I can be working on. And when I get a chance, I can kind of choose which project or policy or procedures I want to work on. And then otherwise, I'm being kind of pulled to assist staff with something, or reviewing staff assignments, or working with administrative things. So even though there's never a typical day, that's what kind of makes the work exciting. And when you're having a really bad day and your brain isn't functioning, there's always some kind of data entry that you can focus on. So you're always being productive with your work. So that's kind of a typical day of my job.
Thank you, Tyler. Whitney?
Jumping off of what Tyler said is, one of my favorite things about my job is, when there's not an impending deadline chomping at my heels, I get to look at my extensive to-do list and kind of, decide, I don't want to sit down today. I think, I'm going to take those frames out to the dumpster. I'm going to grab the sledge and I'm going to take apart this cabinet and finish that up. Or I'm going to grab this collection of 50 boxes and start, digging through and, putting things in the freezer to sit and debug and get dirty and gross. Or like, if I'm just like, oh, I'm really tired today. Today's going to be a paperwork day. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to send out deed of gifts, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to catalog, and I'm going to, have more of a quiet day. And yeah, just like Sarah said as well, there's not a typical day. I've been on the roof of a restaurant in iDrive, pulling off some iconic ceramic tiles to add to our collection, and I've gone through mud and stuff like that. I have really boring days. I have really exciting days where we open up a time capsule, and it's just giving classes, giving talks, speeches, going to conferences, or even writing, doing a lot of history. Basically, everyone in our department writes for our magazine publication, so we all get a little bit of just original history and writing mixed in with all the other things we still have to do. So it's being like a jack of all trades and just really everything, because all that fun stuff, there's also, I got to know copyright, I got to know, I'm in charge of all the legal stuff of making sure our donations come in correctly, and that we've got our loans handled and everything is signed and everything. Someone doesn't like the way this is written, so I have to rewrite it and make sure that I've rewritten it appropriately, and I haven't disparaged our institution by something I put into a contract or something like that. It's everything.
Thank you, Whitney. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I would have known about corporate business archives when I finished out of graduate school. I would have jumped on that bandwagon right away. There's so many fringe benefits that you don't think about when you're starting off. You just want a job, you just don't really know. But if you get in a great company, a business archives, then your fringe benefits, your retirement, your 401k, your insurance, no weekends, no evenings, no opening events. Oh my gosh, what, no working with volunteers. It's just so relaxing. It's so, and technology, I have an IT department. I don't have to lift a finger. I need a new computer, bam, new computer. I need a bigger monitor, bam, new monitor. That sort of thing, you just don't think about when you're right out of school. You just want to work, help people. You want to find the latest Indiana Jones thing, all that stuff, which is great. It's really exciting. But in the long run, the business archives is awesome. And I just wish I jumped on it sooner. Of course, it's business, and you're the first one to go if that company goes down. Target had a great archives. The business went down in 2009, archives gone completely. They lost 4 people, lost their interactive center and so forth. So there are pluses and minuses with everything you do. I just think business archives has so many benefits, and there's so many business archives. There's really a lot. There's a list on SAA. If you go on the Business Archivist portal, you'll have a list of all the different company archives. They're in a directory, and you could start, applying to those positions and so forth. And it's surprisingly how few people apply for these positions. They're always talking about it on our listserv for the business archives, where it's tough to get people to apply for the positions. They're paying very well, but people just don't want to apply for it for whatever reason. But you should apply for it. Whatever business archive there is, apply for it, and I'll help you. I'll be your mentor if you need it. It's a great road. I wish I could hire more people because it's really just a great position. You're doing everything that you learned in school, if you went to archive school, that you do in the business. I'm working with photographs. I'm a loan arranger. I have a database. I'm describing elements. The one thing is I have unlimited supply of folders and photo sleeves, and I don't have to worry about that sort of stuff, which I know I'm bragging a little bit, but that's what I get to do. So go archives.
Again, you had me at no budget issues. All right. Getting into tips on interview presentations. This question comment is solely for Sarah.
Okay, so when we were setting up this panel, we were talking about presentations. I brought it up and everybody else was like, I didn't have to do a presentation. I'm like, y'all are lucky ducks. So I have had to do a presentation at pretty much every single interview in person that I've done. So I have a few tips and things that I've learned along the way, etc. First of all, bring backups. I would email myself and this goes for a conference presentation too. I would email my presentation to myself. I put it on my Google Drive. I put it on flash drive, and I brought a printed copy that I stuck in my folio thing that I carried around. I was paranoid. This is a great thing because sometimes your tech will not work. The projector doesn't work, or something goes wrong, you can't sign into your account, just the internet goes down, whatever, something could happen. So be prepared. I always recommend not using a lot of audio or video clips. That's usually the tripping point for tech issues. The audio just won't work, or it won't play, or you can only hear it on the computer that the presenter's using. It's not going through, the big speakers in the room, things like that. Same thing for clicking from links in your PowerPoint. If you're doing a presentation and you're trying to click out to a different website, don't click on the link from PowerPoint. Have those open in a separate browser window, ready to go. And then when you get to that slide, you can just minimize your PowerPoint and you can go right back to, the browser window. Get comfortable with PowerPoint, Google Slides, whatever it is that you're using. No one wants to be the person who's sitting there fumbling with, how do I start a slideshow again? Or, how do I get back to the slide that I was at without having to sit there and click through, the 20 slides to get to it. Just familiarize yourself with your software that you're using. Practice what you're going to say. Write a script if you need to. Memorize portions of it if you need to. Practice. Be aware of a time limit. If they said you have 20 minutes and then we have 10 minutes for questions, your presentation needs to be 20 minutes. Do not go over. If you're a couple minutes short of it, that's fine, but don't spend all 30 minutes when they told you you've only got 20. Make sure that you're answering the question that they ask you to talk about. Some of the questions that I've had have been very broad, talk about the future of archival reference services. And I'm like, okay. So then you have to kind of pick a facet to talk about. Sometimes they're very specific. For example, when I interviewed for my position here at UF, I was asked to introduce my current archives program to an audience of students or other members of campus community. This should be a basic orientation session as you would give to a class. Do not introduce the university archives at UF, but rather the archives in which you are currently working. So that was very specific. Don't just read text off of a page or a screen. You don't want to stand there and sound like a robot, because that's what you'll sound like. Be natural, move around a little bit. I talk with my hands. I have a virtual background, so you can't see my hands as well, but I talk with my hands. I move around a little bit. Don't just stand there, gripping your papers and shaking like a leaf, because that's not a good impression. Have I mentioned practice? Practice what you're going to say. Don't make your slides super text heavy, because that will just prompt you into just reading off your slides. And I'm sure we've all been in college classes where professors have done that, and it's no fun for anybody. I will oftentimes bring my phone, and I'll set my phone in front of the keyboard or next to the mouse, and I'll start a timer once I start, so that I can glance down at it as I'm advancing a slide, and I can see how much time I've taken. So that's a good way to make sure that you're not going to go over the time limit that they sent you, because there may not be a clock in the room, or if there is a clock in the room, you may not be able to see it. So just think about those kinds of things. Be yourself, be engaging, be funny. It's okay to be a little bit informal. You don't have to stand up there like you're giving a presentation to the president of the United States or something like that. When I was in one presentation for a job, it was for a reference archivist at a popular culture library. I had my PowerPoint with slides of Gandalf sitting in, the archives in Lord of the Rings, and made a joke about how hopefully you wouldn't bring candles or water into your archive when you're reading, I had references to Monty Python, just be engaging and fun, because they'll remember that. They're not going to remember the person who just stood up there and droned on. They're going to remember the person who was engaging, and it's a way for them to see how you present to an audience, and also how you teach and how you're going to, do outreach and things like that. And to help us segue into the next question, our last question, don't use a ton of archival jargon or a lot of library jargon, because you never know who's in that audience. You're more than likely going to be presenting to folks who don't know what an archivist does. They may not understand all the jargon, and if you start using it, you're just going to alienate them and they're going to be bored and they're not listening to you. So be prepared to have some questions asked of you from non-archivists. Some of them can be real curveballs. Some of them will ask a question, you're like, how did you even think of that? Like, where is this question coming from? Again, answer honestly, don't be afraid to say, oh, I haven't really thought of that before, but let me kind of talk this through. Those kinds of things. Again, your presentation, people will be asked, if they were at the presentation, to provide feedback to the search committee. So be aware of that as you're presenting. Again, you're still on camera and you're still interviewing. And to kind of continue on with that, the last tip that I would have for talking about the archival things with non-archivists is trying to come up with some kind of analogy that'll work outside of the field to explain things. Like, I explain a finding aid to people like a book. I'm like, okay, every book has a title, right? Well, all of our collections have titles. All of our collections have an identifier or collection number. That's like the call number on a book. All of our finding aids have lists of the boxes and the contents that are in those boxes. That's like your table of contents or your index in a book. And the page numbers refer to the box and folder number. That's how you find things. So I use those kind of analogies because that's a good way to connect somebody who may not have ever seen a finding aid before, but you use a book and they're like, oh, I get it. So that's my advice for presenting, for talking with non-archivist folks. Be polite, be friendly. Never assume that someone knows what you're talking about, especially in a large group setting, because you won't know who the archivists are and who aren't. So don't be condescending, but just say, oh, well, this is, and explain what it is without using all of our archival jargon, which we are famous for using.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Tyler, do you have any to add about connecting with non-archivist audiences?
Yeah. So as I've mentioned, I'm a nervous person like Michael. And what I have found has helped is talking to your friends and family about your archives and what you do, because you know them and you can very easily read when they've checked out of the conversation. And it helps kind of find ways to communicate about your institution and about your collections with non-archives people. I practice it all the time and I'm like, oh, that's a really boring way to talk about the archives. Let me reframe that. And my other suggestion is, especially if you have a hard time with public speaking, we do a lot of tours in our institution and I've done them. It helps to watch other coworkers do the presentations too, because I've learned a lot from how other folks talk about our collections and about specific items. So take advantage of your own institution's outreach activities, because you can learn a lot from your colleagues, or even webinars with other institutions. It's just helpful to kind of see how other people talk about the field and about institutions and their collections. So take advantage of those opportunities as well. And I would go on our tours that other people were presenting and make notes about what they said about certain things. And I was like, I'm going to say that from now on. So that's kind of my advice for connecting with non-archivist audiences.
That's great. Thank you. Go on to Whitney.
So I think this is another can be a difficult line to straddle, and I've had to do it several times in interviews, not so much in presentations for an interview, but you will most likely be interviewing with non-archivists or people who don't know what the archive is. I mean, you might have someone in your interview that is close to the archives and does know what you're talking about. But, you know, our archivist interviews sometimes had, I mean, we had high level Orange County employees that they didn't even know what happened in a museum. So, you know, and there are different personalities. There are people that, you know, want you to explain it to them. And then you'll have people in your interview that don't know what archives are, but feel like they should know what archives are. And they get, you know, a little perturbed that you are explaining things to them because I know what that means. So it can be a hard line to straddle. Yeah, I like to use MPLP as an example. You know, probably a typical question that you would get in an interview would be, you know, how do you plan to handle, you know, the severe backlog in the archives? And, you know, on one side, you don't want to say, well, per Green and Meisner's 2005 article on more product, less process, you know, you don't want to overwhelm them. But you also don't want to talk in such generalities that it makes it sound like you're not an archival professional and you're just talking like a person who's like, well, here's what I would do to clean up my study. So, you know, it's like an intermingling of, you do want to, at least I like to drop in some of those archival terms and buzzwords. So also, if there's someone in there that knows what they're listening to, they'll know that you know what you're talking about. You know, you can say, you know, well, you know, a lot of people prescribe to the more product, less process method, which means, you know, you go through things fast and you really kind of arrange things at a top level, but you don't get too, you know, down into the weeds with things. But I think every case needs, you know, its own plan, and it depends on how much is in the backlog, kind of, you know, gauging out, you know, what is your timeline for how long do you want this backlog to take for you to get through? And then figuring out how deep into the processing can you get with that. You know, speaking like that tells the, you know, director of family services of Orange County, you sound like you know what you're talking about. You use a few things I didn't understand, but I did understand the conversation and I appreciate that. And it tells, like, maybe you have a senior archivist in your interview that is archiving for an assistant archivist. They're like, oh yeah, they know what they're talking, they understand. So it's, you know, you really kind of want to walk the line between not being too general and not being too jargony and specific and excluding anybody.
Thank you, Whitney. And Michael?
Yeah, I would say I'm dealing with non-archivist audience all the time. There's nobody else in the company does what I do. I don't even think my supervisor knows what I do. But so I'm trying to connect with everybody. One of the things that I have done is that I have an interweb platform that I do kind of like a bi-monthly thing where I throw up photographs of unknown associates or employees, and I say, name that associate. And then people, you know, there's 4,000 associates, so then not everyone, you know, replies, but a lot of people look at it from photos from the 80s and like, oh, great hair job. And, you know, look at those pants. And they try and name all the associates, and I name, you know, 1 through 12 or whatever it is. And people love that. Looking at old photographs, looking at old hairstyles and clothing styles and stuff like that, old cars. More photographs I throw up there, the better response I get. I use social media. We have a social media person, and I give her a couple of photographs each month. This is the 30th anniversary of so-and-so. And then they go, oh, I remember those days. It was so hot and muggy those days. And anything for them to reconnect is, you know, the best way that I know how to connect with a non-archivist audience. They just know it's a photograph, and that's fine. And then they might know that, oh, I have that brochure, my, you know, whatever is in the garage. I'm not using it. And then I'll, and they'll say that in Facebook, whatever, and I'll reach out to them and I'm like, that would be a great item for the archives. And they're like, oh, sure, we'll send it in. Bam. So that's how I interact with my audience, which is non-archives, but they like photographs and make sure that it's interesting photographs rather than just, a square and a whatever or a brochure. But it has to be something that they're going to connect with. You just never know what's going to hit or miss with them, but just keep trying. The more that gets out there, the more they'll see it. And we always put in the JM Family Corporate Archives logo, which I have this little logo at the bottom of each thing so they know where it's coming from. Thank you.
That's some amazing crowdsourcing of information. Thank you, Michael. So this is the last chance for questions via this webinar. The folks on this presentation, their emails are on the screen right now, so please feel free to reach out to them. I did capture some tips that were mentioned in the chat, so I'm just going to go over those real quickly. So again, if you have any last questions, please put them in the chat. The tips are, if you're an introvert, you have to be more of an extrovert in an interview situation. A comment at a staff meeting, I was asked why I wanted to come to the University of West Florida. I waxed enthusiastically about collections, archives, etc. And the person then said loudly at the group, I thought you would mention our beautiful beaches. And being landlocked from Illinois, I'd never even considered beaches. So sometimes you might want to give some thought outside of the institution, the university perhaps. And last thing, if you can get a job in a library, ask if they will send you to the Modern Archives Institute in DC or Georgia or Rare Book School. So those are some great tips. There are no more questions in the chat. Thank you, everyone, especially our presenters today. Thank you so much for being here, especially for how long it went. There are no more questions, so I'm going to stop the recording, and that is the end of our presentation today. Thank you again, everyone.